Imagine meeting one of your ancestors face to face. Would you look up or would you look down? For millions of years, our evolutionary family kept changing shape, and there was never one single answer to that question because there was never one single human body. It helps to drop an assumption immediately. Human evolution was not a straight line from small and primitive to tall and modern. It was a branching tree with different species and populations existing at different times, in different environments, each one shaped by climate, diet, and the specific demands of the landscape they lived in, not by some steady march toward a predetermined final form. Start with Australopithecus afarensis, the species that includes the famous fossil known as Lucy, discovered in Ethiopia and dated to roughly 3 million years ago. Based on her partial skeleton and comparative anatomy, researchers estimate she stood a bit over 3 feet tall, notably short by modern standards, though it's worth stressing that this comes from statistical reconstruction of incomplete remains, not a precise measurement, and body size varied considerably between individuals. Her body combined traits that look strikingly different from ours: relatively long arms suited to some remaining time spent in trees, alongside clear anatomical evidence of walking upright on 2 legs. She wasn't simply a smaller, earlier version of a modern human. She represented a genuinely different evolutionary solution to surviving in her environment. Move forward, and Homo habilis appears in the fossil record, a species whose classification remains actively debated among paleoanthropologists, with fossils attributed to it showing real variation in size and proportion. What matters more than any single height estimate here is the broader pattern. Early members of our genus, Homo, were beginning to show anatomical shifts tied to increased mobility on the ground and a changing way of life, not a sudden jump in size that neatly separates them from what came before. There's also the question of difference between males and females within a single species, something researchers call sexual dimorphism, and it varied considerably across our evolutionary history in ways that tell their own story. Australopithecus afarensis shows fairly pronounced size differences between estimated male and female individuals, a pattern more similar to some living great apes today than to modern humans. That degree of size difference between sexes tends to correlate across many species, with particular social and mating structures, giving researchers an indirect window into early hominin social life, not just their physical size. Homo erectus marks one of the genuinely major shifts in this story. Some Homo erectus individuals, based on skeletal evidence including the remarkably complete specimen known as Turkana, reached heights broadly comparable to modern humans, a significant change from earlier hominins. Their proportions shifted too: longer legs relative to their arms, a more efficient build for covering long distances on foot across open, hot environments. Researchers studying these proportions have pointed to a straightforward advantage. Longer limbs increase the body's surface area relative to its volume, helping shed excess heat more efficiently, a genuinely useful trait for a species now spending far more time exposed on open savanna rather than sheltered forest. Homo heidelbergensis, generally considered a likely common ancestor shared by both Neanderthals and modern humans, fits into this story as another meaningful data point, with fossil evidence from sites across Africa and Europe suggesting individuals reaching heights comparable to many modern populations alongside a notably robust build. As with earlier species, though, researchers are careful to stress that these figures come from a limited number of specimens, and broad claims about a fixed average height for the entire species go well beyond what a handful of fossils can actually support with confidence. It's worth addressing directly here whether any ancient humans were unusually, dramatically tall, because sensational claims about prehistoric giants circulate constantly online with essentially no scientific support behind them. The honest answer is more measured. Height varied meaningfully between individuals and populations, and some individuals across various hominin species were likely taller than average for their group, exactly the kind of natural variation you'd expect in any population, human or otherwise. That is a very different claim from the idea of an entire separate race of giant prehistoric humans, a notion the actual fossil evidence simply does not support. Neanderthals deserve a real correction here too. because the old image of the hunched, primitive caveman has been thoroughly revised by decades of subsequent research. Neanderthals were generally shorter than many modern human populations, but describing them simply as short badly undersells what their skeletons actually show. Broad, robust frames, powerful musculature, large chests, and proportionally shorter forearms and lower legs, a build associated with cold climate adaptation and retaining body heat rather than shedding it. Standing beside a modern human, a Neanderthal might well have appeared shorter while being noticeably more powerfully built. Height and body size, it turns out, are simply not the same measurement. That climate connection runs through this entire story, formalized in biology through two related observations, Bergmann's rule and Allen's rule. Broadly, populations adapted to colder climates tend toward bulkier bodies and shorter limbs, reducing surface area to conserve heat, while populations adapted to hotter climates tend toward leaner, longer-limbed builds that shed heat more efficiently. Human evolution followed this general pattern repeatedly, though researchers are careful to note it's a tendency shaped by many interacting factors, not a rigid, universal law applied identically to every population and every case. Then there are the Denisovans, and honestly, the most scientifically responsible thing to say about their height is that we don't fully know yet. Much of what's currently understood about this population comes from genetic evidence and a comparatively sparse fossil record, a few bone fragments and teeth rather than a complete skeleton. Dramatic claims about their appearance circulating online often go considerably further than the actual evidence currently supports. Sometimes, in science, the most honest and genuinely interesting answer really is simply that more evidence is needed before drawing firm conclusions. Diet shaped these evolving bodies just as powerfully as climate did, and the two forces were often deeply intertwined. A shift toward more reliable access to meat and marrow, along with the invention of cooking, is thought by many researchers to have provided the additional caloric density needed to fuel larger bodies and larger brains simultaneously, since both are metabolically expensive tissue to grow and maintain. A population without consistent access to that kind of calorie-dense nutrition, regardless of genetic potential, would have real physical limits on the body size it could actually sustain generation after generation, a reminder that height was never purely a matter of genetics operating in isolation from environment and available food. Even within our own species, Homo sapiens, height varies enormously, shaped by genetics, nutrition, childhood health, and population history. Average height in numerous populations has shifted measurably across different historical periods, generally rising alongside improved nutrition and public health. Clear evidence that height was never some fixed, unchanging trait belonging permanently to our species. Try to actually picture walking through prehistoric Africa and encountering these different figures in sequence. A small Australopithecus moving cautiously along the tree line, a tall, long-legged Homo erectus striding confidently across open grassland, a broad, powerfully built Neanderthal working near a cold cave entrance in Ice Age Europe. Would you immediately recognize every one of them as human? The honest answer is complicated. Some would likely feel startlingly familiar in posture, in expression, in the simple recognition of intent behind their eyes. Others would look unmistakably, physically different from anyone you'd pass on a modern street. Every single one of them, though, belongs somewhere on the same continuous, branching evolutionary journey that eventually produced the body reading these words right now, which points to the deeper lesson underneath all of this. Height alone was never really the whole story. Weight, muscularity, limb proportions, skeletal robustness, endurance, the way a body handled heat or cold, all of it mattered as much or more than a single number describing how tall someone stood. Evolution was never simply making bodies bigger or better over time. It was producing bodies suited to specific environments and specific ways of life, over and over again, through millions of years of continuous, branching experimentation. Researchers reconstructing all of this rely on a consistent set of tools, comparing limb bone lengths to known statistical relationships in living populations, examining joint surfaces and muscle attachment sites for clues about build and strength, and cross-referencing findings across multiple specimens whenever the fossil record allows it. None of these methods produce a single, perfectly precise number for any given individual or species. They produce ranges, probabilities, and estimates that shift and sharpen as new fossils are discovered and new analytical techniques are developed, which is exactly why responsible science communication treats these figures as our current best understanding rather than a fixed, final answer carved in stone. So there was never one single human shape and never one single perfect body. Small bodies survived, tall bodies survived, powerfully built bodies survived. Each one carried a genuinely different solution to the challenge of simply staying alive as a human being, long before any of them became what stands here now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next.